Welcome to Think with a Drink, the weekly episode series brought to you by the ARIES Foundation for Financial Education. And tonight's episode, we're going to be doing taking control of your financial future, or ways to take control of your financial future, however you want to look at that. Next slide, just real quick, a little checklist for you. Just understand this event is being recorded. There will be a chat box, however, so if you do visit or you do have a question while you're watching, you can drop into the chat box and we will try to answer that. It will come to us and we will get an answer back to you. Next slide. Just so you know, your presenters for this evening, my name is Tom Alessi. I am the president of the ARIES Foundation for Financial Education. I have been in financial services. This is my 23rd year. I'm an investment advisor, which means I act as a fiduciary whenever giving guidance or advice to any of my clients. I want to bring my Vice President, Craig, in. Craig, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Craig Richardson. I'm the Vice President of the ARIES Foundation, and I've been doing this a little over 17 years now. I specialize in doing financial planning for small businesses and families, and to help them come up with a comprehensive plan so they can have a better relationship with their money.
Terrific. And Craig will be chiming in as we go along. So we told you that the presentation, Think with a Drink, is brought to you by the ARIES Foundation for Financial Education. You can visit our website. It's www.ariesfoundation.org to learn a little bit more about what we do. But really, the mission behind ARIES is trying to help everyone have a better relationship with their money. Because whether you realize it or not, you are in a relationship with your money. And just like any other personal relationship that you might have, there are behaviors and emotional triggers that occur that can cause us to act, as Craig and I like to say, somewhat irrationally sometimes when we deal with our money and our finances. And so all we're trying to do is trying to help everybody take a little bit of that emotion out of dealing with your money. Next slide. This is just some disclosures, just so you know. I'm not going to read them. We're a nonprofit organization. We're located in Newton, Massachusetts. We do this purely as an educational and informational episode. All we ask, since we make it available on our website, we make it available on the YouTube channel, and it's available as a show on New TV. You can check them out at newtv.org. That you just, if you're going to share it, you do it in an educational manner as well. Next slide, please, because now we come to the fun part of the evening. We call this Think with a Drink because we want this to be educational, but in a casual and relaxed manner. And so we can't think of a better way to do that than if we have something cold to sip on as we're doing it. Tonight we are drinking, this is Cloud Candy. This is from the Mighty Squirrel. They're located in Waltham, Massachusetts. Fun little fact with the Mighty Squirrel, Craig and I were actually invited and got to go to the grand opening event when they opened the new brewery in Waltham. So if you ever get a chance, I believe it's at Waverly Oaks Avenue, you might want to check them out. But say, Skol.
Skol.
A terrible pour there.
It was frothy there, huh?
All right, next slide. So let's get started on this. So the agenda for this evening, we'll talk a little bit about financial planning, protection strategies, wealth accumulation, retirement planning, estate planning, and then business planning for business owners who might be listening. So next slide. So the importance of financial planning, right? So we talk to people all the time about putting together a financial plan and why it makes sense, right? We talk about setting goals and having goals and understanding what you're trying to do by those goals, whatever that might be.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of financial planning for individuals, and it really starts off with trying to understand where you are now, where you want to see yourself get to, and then coming up with a structure to help you achieve that goal. And so that's where, you talk about budgeting and where all that stuff starts.
And really, one of the pieces there, that's the thing. The most critical part is the earlier you start saving, and I don't care what you're saving for, right? It doesn't matter. But the earlier that you start, because the one thing that you're never going to get back, and we'll talk about this a little bit with wealth accumulation, is time. So the earlier you get started, whatever the goal is you're trying to save for, the better off you're going to be. Next slide. Right, so, one of the things when we talk to people is about having that, like you say, the coach. Right?
Absolutely, yep.
Having somebody that you can talk to and give you some guidance and advice. Like I said, from my point, I'm a fiduciary, so I'm always going to be giving what is considered in best interest of my clients when I'm talking to them. But you just want to have somebody who's there, who can just, give you a little bit of guidance, give you a little advice.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing too, Tom, is that, most employers now are putting a lot of the retirement burden on the employees, right? So as you're trying to juggle not just a family budget, talking about, putting away money for your kids for college, buying a house, doing all those, the major purchases, and then being responsible for your own retirement later on. And then, with all the rules, regulations, and laws and taxes and all that change, it's very overwhelming for any individual to try to manage all that themselves. Right. So it's really great to have someone who can coach you along, who does this every day for a living, and can get you through and think about all the pieces that you don't want to think about. Because everybody likes to think about, I'm going to buy a house. They don't want to think about, do I need long-term care?
Yeah, well, or how am I going to get there? Or how am I going to put the money down? Or how am I going to put that savings goal into place?
Right.
And how am I going to make all of that work with what I'm currently doing or what I'm currently spending?
Yep.
And, oh, by the way, I have this other debt I have to deal with. So having somebody there, I mean, the statistic is that working with an advisor usually will gain, it's somewhere around 3 or 4%, right, out over time.
Absolutely, as opposed to trying to invest yourself and doing it emotionally. Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Next slide. Right, so protection strategies. So just understand with one of the things with protection strategies, so, when we talk about some of this stuff, you're talking about having money in the bank. There's the first fail-safe, right? And then life insurance, that's protecting your life, and we'll talk about each of these in a second. Disability income insurance and why that's important, and then long-term care. So when you look at that statistic, the pandemic, when we talk about emergency reserves, that number is actually low now. I think that number's higher. It's closer to 50%, the number of people who don't have a sufficient amount of money sitting in the bank.
Well, I think a lot of people have run through that money that they did have if they had it in the first place.
Yeah,
right.
I think even a scarier statistic was that it's less than like 25% have $1,000 sitting in the bank right now.
Right.
The life insurance statistic, that definitely is low, because I know we just did one not too long ago on that, and that number is closer to 40% of the population that does not have any life insurance whatsoever. Disability, that's the statistic. Like by the time someone in their 20s, the likelihood that they might get disabled, it's 1 in 5. By the time they retire, right, get to age 65.
Yeah, and that's an issue because if you're disabled, well, you still cost money.
Yes.
If you die, well,
it's only a one-time
not so much
thing,
so,
and
right.
then, it's not an ongoing cost. And then long-term care, that actually statistic, another one that is low there, because right now, according to longtermcare.gov, it's 7 out of 10. Someone turning 65 today, 7 out of 10 are going to need some kind of assisted care. Next slide, because we can go through this a little bit in a little bit more detail. The emergency reserve thing, that's where the experts, right? Whatever I'm using air quotes, so you have to forgive me there with that. Whatever the experts say there, that you should have 3 to 6 months. What Craig and I say is that you should probably have somewhere around 6 to 8 weeks at this point. Mm-hmm. Just get something into the bank. Start putting something away to build up that emergency reserve account. And that emergency reserve account should be separate from your savings or your checking. There should be like, what is that? The thin blue wall? What is that thing with the police department, right? There's something that so they can't touch each other. You can't
prison bars?
Yeah. Like in a separate money market account or something where you don't have immediate access to it and you're only going to tap into it when there are emergencies involved. Life insurance, look, if you've got somebody who counts on your income or counts on your existence for household expenses or, for kids' care, for education funding, whatever it may be, then you need life insurance. And that's the bottom line, and really you're doing not only yourself, but a disservice to the people that you love and care about by not having it, because ultimately it's your biggest asset.
Well, the other issue is life insurance is probably the most underrated financial tool out there. Its ability to enhance every aspect of your financial situation is just incredible when you know how to use it. So.
And then the same thing with disability income, like Craig mentioned, right? It's one thing should you pass, it's another should you become disabled. And those expenses are still there, and now there's probably additional expenses, additional needs because of the disability. So having some kind of protection, most of us get it through our employer, You just want to check and make sure. Sometimes you have to elect that, but that's something that you should do. And then long-term care, listen, the sweet spot for everybody right now is probably about age 53. So once you get to the age 55, you should definitely be looking at it because the line in the sand is 60. Those who look at it and buy it, they've done it before age 60. Those who looked at it and decided not to take it, they're 61. So it's literally a line in the sand for those who are getting coverage. The older we get, the more expensive it becomes because they know when you're 65, 7 out of 10 of you are going to need it. So it becomes much more expensive.
Well, the big issue too, Tom, is the silver tsunami, right? I mean, how many people in the baby boomer generation are going to be turning 65 or 70 in the next few years?
1,000 people a day.
1,000 people a day, right? And how many of those people actually have long-term care in place? You know, it's a very, very small portion.
Right.
And that cost is just getting more exorbitant every single year.
Yes, it keeps going up, and that's part of the reason for it. Like I said, 1,000 a day. I mean, the outer edge of the baby boomers are in their mid-70s now. So it's still going in terms of dealing with it. Next slide. All right, so wealth accumulation, right? So this is the whole talking about time, right? Nothing more than that. So you can see there's 3 different color boxes there, right? So the first guy, he does, for 32 years, he's putting $100 away and he's getting a hypothetical 7% a year on his money, right? So $3,200, you put it away for 32 years, $100 a month, $1,200 a year for that amount of time. It grew to be $143,000. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a good number. But one guy did it for only 10 years, from 22 to 32, did the same $100, got the same 7%, out to age 65, and that person has $174,000. The last person, Bill, the orange dude, he did it for 43 years, right? $100 a month, all the way from age 22 to when he retired, ended up with almost $330,000. It's time in, not trying to guess when it's going to be, trying to guess where it's going to go. It's time in the market. And that's the one thing you can't get back. You can't get back time. You can put more money in. You can try to get more accumulation, but you'll never get the time back. And so the earlier you start the lesson, the more apt you're going to be to have greater wealth out over time. Next slide. All right, so diversification is the key. You know, this is, don't put all your eggs in one basket, right? Well, that's the cliche with that. But the idea is, when you look at an allocation strategy, asset allocation, diversifying your assets across multiple different sectors is going to do well in the long term. For a return, ultimately, the statistic says that over 90% of your return will come from being diversified, from having asset allocation. Well, less than 2% is going to come from market timing.
Right. Well, that's because you can't pick the winner every year. Is it going to be large cap, small cap? Is it going to be international real estate? When you look at the scattergram over 20 years, every year it's a different winner.
Yes.
So if you want to have some of your money in the winner, as opposed to just in the loser or the winner.
Right.
Right. So take advantage of that.
Yeah, and actually there's a whole thing with that. It's like a Callan periodic going back to, like, what is that, 7th or 8th grade science, right? You know, in terms of it. But it goes across all the asset classes, like Craig said, out over 20 years. And you really can't pick the winner. But the idea is, if I can spread it across all the assets, and I do that every year, I'm going to win out over time. I'm going to do better when I deal with it that way, right? Some of this comes into, if we're talking about non-retirement accounts, about trying to do it in a way where we're being tax efficient with the funds versus, you know, trying to sell and buy and go that way with it. So there is some diversification that can allow us to be a little bit more efficient. But just understand, this is more about finding the right mix, and as I like to say, taking the motion sickness out of your portfolio. Because the problem is, if we're just riding the wave up and down, a lot of times we get frustrated by that and we don't stay in. And time in, just like the slide before, is more important than anything else.
Cool. Because it's just as important to manage risk as it is to manage growth.
Yes, absolutely. Next slide. See, because it's always about risk. That's what it's always about in terms of everything is about risk. It's all about risk management and understanding it. And we know, Craig and I, our whole industry is built on accumulation and what the return is and what's happening with it. But ultimately, it's about how much risk you're willing to take and what you're getting for that risk that you're taking as far as a return. And would you be much better off having a little bit less risk and getting near or close to the same return where your downside is protected? It's more of playing defense than playing offense when we're talking about risk. And for us, it's always been about risk. It's always looking at the portfolio from a risk perspective, not a return perspective. So always think about that. Yeah, nowadays the market's setting a new high every day. Like, it's so fun, in terms of going through that. When the downturn happens, you want to be protected. Next slide. All right, retirement planning, right? So, we just had this conversation with somebody today where we were talking about, we understand somebody who's in their 20s, retirement isn't one lifetime away. It's like almost 2 lifetimes away. So we get it. It's way off into the future. And for some of us in our late 40s or early 50s, it seems way off into the future, but it's something that you need to be thinking about and preparing for. Social Security at this point, it's probably 67 for most of the audience here in terms of what's there. That's full retirement age, so you got to be thinking about no longer 65 that I'm playing
Right.
for. I'm playing to 67 to get the most benefit I'm probably going to be able to achieve with it.
Yeah, if you're in your 20s, that someday may be 70,
Yeah, right.
72. I mean, you just don't know what the future is going to be.
You just don't know where it's going to go. Pensions, let's face it, there really aren't, unless you're in a municipal job, a teacher or something like that, you're not going to have a pension. You're going to be responsible for the income. Healthcare costs, Craig already talked about it, the silver tsunami, and that's all going up. So what happens for most people is the statistic says, even though you want to retire at a certain age, let's say 67 for the example, the statistic is that most people end up retiring earlier. Usually about almost 4 years earlier for a number of reasons. One, the economy, downturn, the closing of the business. But 2, the other is health. You can't continue to do the job in the way you want to. So all well and good to be planning out to 67, but a lot of times what happens is it ends up being 63, and now what are we doing? Am I taking Social Security early? How am I dealing with this? Am I bridging for that strategy? You've got to be aware of it in terms of going through it. And then the other is, we're living longer. What's the average life right now?
For a man, 87. For a woman, 89.
Right. And that's average.
Right.
So that means that more than likely the statistic for a couple, age 65, that one of you is going to be alive into your 90s. That's a long time. It's a long time to be planning for, and it's a lot that needs to be considered when you talk about when you're going to retire and how you're going to retire.
I guess that depends on how old you are now.
Well, no, you got to get to
85
65
now, it's not that long.
Yeah, but you have to get to 65. Next slide.
If you're 2, yes.
Right. So this just talks about, hey, if at age 65 you wanted to get $1 million, what do you need in order to put away on a monthly basis if you were 30 years old at 6%, which I think is more reasonable than trying to target the 8%, that's almost $700 a month to get to the $1 million number. And then you can see if you're 50, if you waited the 20 years, it's almost $3,400, it's over $3,400 a month to get to that number. That's at 6%. So that just lets you know, and that $1 million, that's just a pile of money. Like, the whole conversation with retirement isn't about the pile of money.
Right.
It's about
Distribution.
how am I taking that money out?
Yep.
And what the rate is I'm taking it out. But this just talks about accumulating, right? How much of that pile am I building up? Next slide. So estate planning, there's really 4 documents that we recommend for everybody to have when we talk about estate planning. That's a will, a durable power of attorney. In the state of Massachusetts, that would be a healthcare proxy. In some states, it's a living will. And then the other is a HIPAA release. You may say, why do I need a HIPAA release? Well, yes, you have a HIPAA release on you dealing with your doctor, but does your spouse?
Right.
Do you have one for your spouse? What if your spouse is in a situation you want to have a conversation with the doctor? If you don't have that HIPAA release for them, that's not going to work. They're not going to have the conversation with you. You need to have something in place that allows somebody else to have the conversation along with you if you're going to do it. So again, the will, it's durable power of attorney,
Yep.
healthcare proxy here in Massachusetts, and a HIPAA.
Yep.
The trust and other things that go along with it, yes, that's on an individual by individual basis. But for everybody, those are the 4 documents that you should have. Next slide.
Well, and the big misnomer too is if you are married, you still need a durable power of attorney.
Yes.
You cannot sign for a spouse just because you're married.
Right.
So if one has all the assets in retirement and that's what you're living on, and all of a sudden they're incapacitated, well, you can't touch that money or do anything with it if you don't have that power of attorney.
Right.
So very important to have those things in place.
Absolutely, right? So this talks about, the different things to use, right? So the will is the first one there, but it talks about trusts, and that would be in the case of somebody if you needed a trust. If you're going to do some charitable giving, there are different ways that you can do charitable gifting and ways that actually you can take advantage of it today with a tax break or actually income from charitable gifting. And then life insurance, because like Craig said, it's probably one of the most misunderstood or misused tools, especially when we're talking about protection strategies. The last little box there says, business owners need to be thinking about these things and about how they're leaving some of that stuff, which segues right into the next one, which is business planning, right? So for business owners, it's sort of a similar conversation. He's getting a quick sip in there. Shh, don't tell anybody.
Okay.
Right? But similar, as a business owner, the question would be, do you have disability income insurance on yourself?
Yep.
And if you don't, why not? Because the only reason that a business owner would not have disability income insurance on themselves is that if you got sick or injured, your lifestyle would not change. And if it would, then you really need to be thinking about it. And the same thing for a key employee type of thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, when the issue with a business is you become mutually dependent on one another, especially if it's a small business, right? You don't have income if the business doesn't exist, and the business doesn't run if you're not there, unless you have key man or you're big enough to have other employees who can do the job when you're not there. So it's very important not only to make sure that you have that income in place, but also what happens if you can't work for a certain period of time? What happens to the business? Does it go on hold? What happens to that income down the road?
Next slide. Right, so 4 critical areas to be thinking about if you're a business owner, right? Succession planning, retirement planning, estate planning, and then key employees, because the key employee is the same conversation. Like they're integral to the operation of the job. And unfortunately, in today's world, it's getting better. They've made a lot of changes. They've made a lot of updates to the retirement rules and to all the tax breaks and tax credits. But if you're a small business and you don't have one in place, it's definitely something for 2022 to be looking at and putting into place. Next slide. So, this just talks about, and I don't know if you can read it in terms of going through that, but the areas that we talked about, right, really are protection strategies, wealth accumulation, estate planning, retirement planning, and if you're a small business owner, business planning, and how they all connect together. Some of the things to be thinking about, some of the thoughts to have with that, and really for everybody, like we talked about, the biggest thing is putting a plan together.
Absolutely, yeah.
Having a goal, thinking about where you want to get to, whether we're talking about, hey, 1 year from now or 10, 20 years down the line, what's that going to look like? Next slide, because that brings it all together for us, because that's really what ARIES is all about. ARIES is all about trying to help everybody sort of build that game plan, build that path. We know the road zigs and zags, right? It's never a straight line in terms of where you're trying to get to. So you just want to make sure you're going to have that goal, whether that's 1 year from now, 5, 10 years from now, how you're going to get there, and to work backwards trying to do it. Next slide. And that's what we do. So you can pop the slide up, it'll say, drop yes in the chat box. So there is a chat box for those who are watching. You can just drop that in. One of the things is we do this for everybody. It is no cost. It's a complimentary consultation. We're happy to sit down because our whole mission is about trying to help everyone have a better relationship with their money. And that's the idea behind this. What can we do to try to help get to that situation? So to give you some direction and understand where you're going.
Right. I mean, when it comes to financial planning, knowledge is power. You don't know what you don't know. right? And even in our industry, we have to keep up on so many different changes between tax laws and financial planning and what's going on in just the marketplaces, that how can the average person who's not doing this every day even hope to keep up?
Right.
And so once again, mistakes can be very, very costly. Even small mistakes can be costly. I have clients who, they knew they could get, didn't know they could get a match from their employer. Well, 2 or 3% of their pay over 10 or 20 years adds up to a lot of money, like we were just talking about. So yeah, it pays to have a financial coach.
Just somebody there to look at it. Next slide. Right, so this is Craig and I in our more formal attire. Those are our custom jerseys. They are TB12, we do understand that, but he is the greatest of all time, and we will still wear them while he's still playing, or at least until we can find Mac Jones jerseys, and we can go from there. Next slide. So one of the things with Think with a Drink, like we said, is we share this on our YouTube channel. We share it on the website. You can go there. But on the YouTube channel, you can see all of the presentations, all of the episodes. As we said, for a lot of these, they are also on newtv.org, so you can look up newtv.org and see the shows there as well. But on the YouTube channel, they're available. You can watch them anytime. You can catch up on an episode. That's subscribe to the network and subscribe to the channel, and then you'll know when we drop a new one, because we tend to drop these on a weekly basis. Next slide. And lastly, if you ever have any questions, if something comes up, you ever want to just, hey, could you just take a look at something for me? You can always drop us a note. You go to the website. It's www.ariesfoundation.org. There's a contact form on there that you can certainly drop a line to us. Or you can just shoot us an email. It's info@ariesfoundation.org. And we'll answer the question, doesn't matter what it is. If we don't know it, believe me, between the two of us, then we'll figure it out, and we'll come back to you with that. But really, it's take advantage of the foundation. That's why it's here. Because like I said, our whole mission is trying to help everyone have a better relationship with their money. And if we can help you out in any way, that's what we're trying to do. We're here to be a support for every family that's out there. And so with that, I'm going to say good night and have a great evening.